So hi everybody. As Kevin said, I will be presenting very quickly the results of my 4 years of PhD research. My supervisor are Magali Bodar and Jan Winold. And the main research I tried to answer in my thesis was whether daylight glare was perceived differently by people from different cultures. So as most of you may know, daylight has many benefits, whether these are related to energy efficiency, to occupants' health, to occupants' comfort, occupants' productivity. It can also give a dynamic experience of architecture and so on. But all these benefits of daylight are only provided when there is visual comfort. So in case of visual discomfort, what the occupants will do is close the blinds. And these blinds will often stay closed for a long period of time. And then we will lose the benefits of daylight. So in order to harvest the daylight benefits, we need to be able to predict discomfort glare from daylight. And to date, there are over 20 daylight discomfort glare metrics that exist. But the problem with these metrics is that none of them can accurately and consistently predict discomfort glare perception from daylight. So one hypothesis I made in my thesis is that maybe there are some other factors that could be implemented in these models, in these metrics, to improve the prediction of discomfort glare perception. So I did the first thing I did was a literature review of all the factors that had been studied for their potential effect on discomfort glare perception. And I found 31 of them. And these 31 factors I classified into 3 main categories. On one hand, we have the factors that are currently used in the matrix and which are mainly related to the glare source. We also have the factors which are related to the context, so for instance, air temperature or time of the day. And at last, we have also the factors which are related to the subject. So for instance, gender, age, culture, and so on. The thing is that in my 4 years of research, I would not have been able to study all these factors, so I had to pick one. And I decided to look at the influence of culture. And the main reason for choosing this factor is that this was one of the only factors that had not been studied on its own. So there was not one study that had been dedicated to study the influence of culture on discomfort glare perception. So what the literature is actually telling us about the influence of culture on discomfort glare perception is that people from Asia seems to be more tolerant toward discomfort glare than people from North America, who in turn seems to be more tolerant toward discomfort glare than people from Europe. So based on this, the main objective of my thesis was to look at the influence of culture on discomfort glare perception. And to do this, I designed a field study that I conducted in 4 different cultures. These 4 cultures were Chile, Belgium, Japan, and Switzerland. So I would conduct the same field study in these 4 contexts. Why these 4 contexts? Well, the first reason was that I wanted to look at the difference between Asia and Europe. And then I added a third culture because it was a very different culture of the 2 first one. And why these countries specifically? It's because of the local presence of daylighting research team over there, which could help me to develop and conduct the field study in these countries. So in each of these culture, then I had to measure discomfort glare perception. So to do that, I need 2 main types of measure. On one hand, I need a luminance map of the field of view, so to collect the physical measurements of the visual discomfort stimulus. And from this luminance map, we can actually derive several photometric values, but also discomfort glare metrics. On the other hand, I also needed to collect subjective assessments of visual discomfort. And this I did through 2 main questions. One was an open-ended question about whether people were bothered by anything in the current lighting conditions. And the second subjective assessment was a glare rating scale. So in total, I did this study for 401 subjects in the 4 countries. And from the initial data set, I had to process the data, but also apply cleansing rules. So for instance, to make sure that all the people I interview were actually acclimatized to that context. So I had to remove a large part of the data, and I did the statistical analysis on a final data set of around 250 subjects. So looking at the results now, so the first question I wanted to answer was whether we could use Discomfort glare metrics in each of these 4 countries in the same way. So can actually the DGP, which is Discomfort glare metric, predict subjects' glare reports in all of these countries? So the subject's glare report is actually a binary variable coming from the open-ended question. So it actually tells us whether the subject reported discomfort glare due to daylight in this open-ended question. And to analyze this binary glare report in correlation with the DGP, I had to apply a ROC curve analysis. So this is the ROC curves that you can observe in each countries, and how you can interpret it is that the higher the curve is towards the upper left corner, the better the performance of the DGP into discriminating between no glare report and glare report. So we want the curve to be the higher and the more bumped towards this upper left corner. You can also measure the performance of the metric from these curves looking at the AUC, which is actually the area under the curve. And we can see that the AUC is around 0.7 for the 4 countries, which means that the DGP is a reasonable model to discriminate between no glare report and glare report in these 4 countries. Next question was to look whether there was actually an influence of this of culture on discomfort glare perception. To look at that, I derive a logistic regression model. So this logistic regression model, the variable that I want to predict is the subject's glare report. So whether or not the subject reported discomfort glare from daylight in the open-ended question. And then the 2 predictors that I am implementing in the model are, on one hand, the glare metric, the DGP, and on the second hand, the culture of the subject. And what the logistic regression models tells us is that the DGP is statistically significant in predicting the subject glare report, but the culture isn't. And in the graph, you can see the curves plotted for each of the 4 culture. So that you can observe a small difference between this curve, but this was not detected as statistically significant in the test, and it is most probably due to noise in the data. So that was one result. But then I also wanted to look whether maybe some other factors that I collected during the study would have an influence of discomfort glare perception. And I found 2 interesting results. The first one is about glare sensitivity. So I asked people to assess whether they were sensitive to glare or not. And this variable, so the self-assessed glare sensitivity, seems to be statistically significant in the logistic regression model, meaning that it could help predict the glare report of the subject. And so what we can see on the graph is that the more sensitive a subject assessed himself or herself, the sooner he will report discomfort glare from daylight, so which seems obvious. And then on the other hand, the other variable was the window view, and more specifically the attractiveness of the view through the window, which was also statistically significant in predicting the glare report of the subject. So it seems that when people feel that their view through the window is attractive, they tend to report glare at higher levels. So in one sense, there seems to be more tolerance towards daylight when they like the view through the window, which also actually makes sense. So what we can actually conclude from this study, well, the first thing is that there was actually no evidence of an influence of culture on discomfort glare perception from daylight in this data set. This is quite an unexpected result because in the literature there was clearly some suggestion of an influence of the culture. The reason for that we cannot say right now. We, of course, need further research to validate the results that we have observed here. But one hypothesis that we can maybe make is that since the studies that have been looking at culture in the literature were always comparing their results of one study to the results of another study. So it was never the same investigator, never the same equipments. Sometimes it was also different protocols to compare the results. So there might have been experimental biases which have played a role in one study and not in the other one, which then have led to the difference in discomfort glare perception observed in these studies. And then a second conclusion would be that these studies show preliminary evidence of an influence of glare sensitivity and view through the window on discomfort glare perception from daylight. Can we actually conclude that there is a real influence of this factor from this data? No, we can't, because the protocol of the study was not designed to look at this data, at this factor specifically. But this result, this preliminary evidence, can be used to develop future studies on the factors influencing discomfort glare perception and potentially improving discomfort glare perception prediction. Thank you.